There we go. Excellent. Thanks, Kobina. If I can just pass over to you. Hope the intro was okay.
No, the intro was brilliant. Hi, hi all. Greetings everyone. And yes, my name is Jerry Kobina. I'm one of the co-claimants of the and a trustee of Plan B. And we have since last year been taking the UK government to court for its human rights violations, for the violations of Articles 2, 8 and 14 in particular, which is the right to life, the right to family life, and the right to not be discriminated against. And yeah, it's kind of a clear argument for us really, which is that as young people, as people from the global south, who emanate from the global south, all of these things are kind of are the discriminatory impacts that we are having to bear the brunt of, because, you know, for the longest time we've been walking along this trajectory of genocides and ecocides. So we convened the extra legal campaign, which we've been calling the Global Majority Versus campaign. And we start there because it's important for us to realize that all of us who are being impacted and bearing the brunt of this do indeed make up the majority of the world's peoples. That's the people of Asia, the people of Abya, which is the Guna name for the Americas, the so-called Americas, as well as Africa, as well as all the colonized peoples of the global north. And what we're hoping is that this environmental crisis, the worldwide ecological crises, the multiple genocides, the multiple ecocides are bringing us all far more to this point of seeing that we are really together in this. And we are yet, the reason why we're yet to sort of succeed in realizing this is because of the historic violence of our separation. And that separation is a separation of colonial destruction, of borders, of the separation of our peoples, and actually the destruction of our indigeneity and our peoplehood. And so we all live in this consciousness of real separation from each other. And that's where the brunt of the impacts of the climate and ecological crises, which is the extractivism, the destruction of lands, the exploitation, the pollution, but not only that, the very, very violent repression that ordinary activists raising awareness around the issues in their community face, if you're from the global south, incredibly violent, happens precisely because of the invisibilization and the lack of visibility given to the reality, which is that the big majority and brunt of this is being faced and has been being faced for centuries in the form of the pillaging of our lands, the pillaging of our families. And so for us within the Global Majority Versus campaign, and particularly PASAC, which is our Pan-African Collective Councils, the Global African Convening Group steering the campaign for us in the diaspora and also on the continent, that this is a campaign not about begging for justice. It's a campaign about reparatory justice and the fact that we actually have a right to reparations. And that right to reparations is not just owed us as Africans, it's owed to the people of Asia, it's owed to the people of the global north, it's owed to Europeans, it's owed to all of us for what's been stolen from us, which is a dignified right to life, a right to being a people and being able to survive and be together. And because that's, you know, the brunt of, you know, that's what we seem to be facing right now, and it's becoming more clear. We think that we have to really centralize this importance of what reparatory justice means, which means that we're not asking for a payout, we're not asking for a handout, but we're actually giving the courts, which again have been responsible for legalizing so many crimes in the past. Slavery was legal, climate genocide is still currently legal, the violent repression is still currently legal, is that we're actually giving the courts an opportunity, and the British establishment therefore an opportunity to acknowledge the harm, because there can't be any repair, there can't be any reparations for our minds, of our lands, if the harm is still going on. And right now that's a big issue because there's a lot of language about reparations, which is seeming to cover it up in the form of, you know, there being a payout. But to put this in context of what our case has been about is the fact that when we brought this case, which there is so much evidence for, which there's scientific consensus for. The UK government's response was actually that any discriminatory impacts of its policies were objectively and reasonably justified. Now, that didn't reach any media newspapers, that didn't make any blowout anywhere, and that's also been a failure in us reaching out and taking this information into our communities. But the UK government in that statement was saying, you know, genocides, repression, all of that stuff, and the younger generation not having a future would be justified. And then the courts on top of that then dismissed the case. And the dismissal of that case was what we appealed at the end of November, which took us to the royal courts, the so-called royal courts of justice. And so we have a real serious duty to bring that awareness away from these so-called institutions of power to ordinary peoples. And that is what I hope we can bring to bear in this conversation, that this is really about how do we get, be it constituents, but our communities, into meaningful dialogue with each other. Because until we unify our people's power, multiple peoples coming together to affect change and to talk about the reality of this, we kind of don't stand a chance. And we're yet to do that. And that's the way that we're going to win, to really establish what our justice looks like. And so with the increasing crackdown and violence, with the increasing interference of global Britain in West Africa in particular, increasing the violence of young people's raising awareness around the environmental issue, we really have to now pay our attention away from thinking that there is any saviorism that's going to come here, to make visible and make clear the people who are really leading the freedom fight to actually stop the human rights violations. And that's, you know, being defended and fought for outside of the courts through active forms of resistance, because no one is coming for them. The UK government's made it clear they're not coming for them. The courts have made it clear that there is a huge difference between law and justice. And so it's our job to come for each other and to bring that together. So our campaign really centers promoting human rights, promoting the fact that there is a clear distinction between law and justice, and that justice and that distinction is being widened every day, and the courts are making that very clear. And really the way we have to do that is by, you know, getting that education and those connections to people. And so that's really the central heartbeat of what this is about and what's needed right now. And what can be done particularly is us, we've been thinking about how we can sit together and come closer together to develop plans locally that are meaningful to a global society, because we are a global people. And so it's not for us to just, you know, raise these issues as local issues. These really aren't local issues anymore, they are global issues. And so the issues being faced where you are, how is it that they can be connected with, you know, communities who want to reach out, who are waiting to make that contact locally, and what we call globally, with the Greens. And why hasn't this been the focus of the Green Party, who talk about being green, but are we're yet to see the visibility of the global green reality, which is that we live in a very anti-green world. And there are a vast majority of people in the world are very green and want to be green, and indigenous people are green. They're the original green parties. Our peoples are the original green parties. And that could be the focus, that could be the push, and that could be what we can promote and really promote together. And take that as an opportunity to expose and call out the UK government and its allies, corporate, state, educational institutions, etc., for their complicity. That's really the main message that we have from the Global Majority Campaign. And we are looking to promote our responses towards the end of the month and outdoor our plans. But if there is a relationship that can be built, it most certainly seems to be that there is a role to play for elected officials to speak up and stand up on the criminalization of life itself, and the criminalization of our communities, and now the complete erasure of the role of the courts in upholding not law, not the rule of unjust laws, but the rule of just law. And there's a huge difference there. because when the courts legalized slavery in the past, it took ordinary people realizing that there was a huge difference between justice and the laws that were in place at the time. And if the Human Rights Act isn't able to provide justice for ordinary peoples, then we have to start thinking about building the alternative institutions that can, or giving name and voice to the laws that we do need. And that can only be done when our communities are in control of that narrative. And we really have to promote those connections and promote that knowledge. I mean, I'm not sure if there's questions, so I can really stop there.
No, that's great. Thank you. It's very sort of powerful narrative. So yeah, I'll throw it open. Lucy, it looks like you had your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to say that was just a fantastic talk, and I'm really glad that I know more now about your campaign. I was really curious to know about, when you thought through your strategy, why did you specifically choose the UK government and courts? I think because I've been looking at the sort of the flow of emissions, and it seems to be that the US is the biggest contributor to the flow of emissions. And therefore I'm curious as to the responsibility you're placing. Is it, this is one domino in a series of other courts and governments you're planning to take to sue? Or is this main pillar in which the rest will fall? Please, I'd love to know more.
Hi, Lucy. Thank you. That's a really good question. I think it's really important that we don't ever, because it's, and I think you're right to ask it, and we get this question actually quite a lot. But we have to be very, very, very concrete and very practical about where we are and why we're here. If you go to the supermarket today in this country and you pick up some avocados, they come from somewhere and are shipped here for dirt cheap so that we can enjoy them here, while, you know, ordinary peoples in parts of Mexico are getting violently repressed. I'm an African. I'm from the Akan peoples of West Africa. And my parents grew up in Bibiani. Well, my dad grew up in Bibiani, which is a gold mining town. Now that gold is being administered by the British. And we are here, and we would be migrated to this country, no doubt because the actual indigenous institutions that we did have been completely destroyed, because even today, Boris Johnson and Priti Patel are working with the Ghanaian government to fund violent repression of investigative journalists and activists of our families. And because, you know, if you lies like chocolate, over 40% or 30% of like world cocoa comes from Ghana. Now, Ghanaian cocoa farmers don't have industries around cocoa that are, you know, supported here, for instance, to be sustainable, to pay them enough for to survive and live. And now with the climate crisis, bearing in mind that 15% of global carbon emissions come through the City of London, the climate crisis, which is now making their one form of salary and income become completely irrelevant, and their energy sources, which is a hydroelectric dam, which provides half of their power, completely ineffective, are precisely because of the way we live here. And we have to be very honest, because if we can't be honest and if we can't tell the truth, then we won't get close to the justice if we want the younger generation and the current people on the front line to kind of get ahead. And so the UK government, I mean, I feel like we all, if we're in this constituency, have a real duty to call out the institutions on which this global order is organized. And so there are many institutions that need to fall and whose harm need to be stopped. But one thing that we never realized, that because we're denied even in our schooling, knowledge of our human rights, knowledge of law, is the fact that, you know, any of us here can take the UK government to court. And the government is in violation. The government is the legal body that is meant to safeguard our human rights under the Human Rights Act. And so the best place that we can focus our attentions as, political participants are right here with the institutions that are meant to be safeguarding our rights. And that's not just the government, actually. That's the law courts, that's schools, all which are public institutions which are meant to administer also defense of human rights. But one thing that is very clear in this, and that we shouldn't also hide away from, is that papers were published on the government website, which are called Global Britain 2020 to 2025. Boris Johnson calls it Empire 2.0. Those are the times we live in. He calls Global Britain Britain 2.0. They're not hiding away from what imperialism is and what power they want and the wealth that they're going to go and steal at any costs are to sustain this image of democracy. And so if we can't start and call that out using ordinary people's power, and we want to hide away and go around to, the US or find the biggest target, then we're going to miss the point of our duty, which is to be somewhat strategic about the fact that this is a very highly organized system. And Britain, scientists in the government itself, Sajid Javid and Mark Carney have all come out and admitted this. The UK has explicitly a very specific role and historic contribution that is disproportionate to its size in where we've got to today. And if we can't start with that truth and that history, then we can't find the area where the repair is going to start from. And the most exciting and powerful thing about this is that that lesson that we have to learn is one that connects us with who we really are, with what we've lost in this kind of space of violence and destruction, which is we've lost the ordinary ways that we used to be. And before colonization reached my continent, the continent that I emanate from, it was practiced here on Europeans. It was perfected here. And when ordinary people here rose and rebelled, for instance, against the land enclosures or the diggers, when people's lands were being taken away from them and they rebelled, and they were saying, actually, no, this can't be justice, and they let that truth ring true, then the British establishment was forced to look elsewhere to sustain its riches and its theft. And that's the trajectory that we've got on, and that led to industrialization, and that's kind of the history. That's still the story that is yet to be told and is being denied. And our job is to tell that story and be truthful. And there's something very empowering about that, because what we're looking for as a campaign, and what we think is really possible, is to find our common humanity in this global Britain from below, because that is who we are. We're clearly not the same as the courts that are saying that we don't have any human rights. We're clearly not the same as the government that is saying that the violation of future generations are justified. We're clearly not the government's lawyers who in courts were saying that we don't, if you're a South London resident, climate change hasn't impacted you yet, even though most young people walk around with anxiety, and there's illegal rates of air pollution everywhere that our communities are. We're not this. We're those aren't us, and so we must provide an alternative. And so if Global Britain is the power that we're up against, then Global Britain from below, that force of who we are and who we're going to discover ourselves to be, is going to be the thing that we do it from. And the way we believe that can be done sustainably in defense of our communities, we're just empowering our communities to claim back our beautiful stories, is when we connect, East Hertford, with, communities also who are also on this journey, who are walking this journey to recover our stories, to recover our histories. And there will be beautiful ones. I didn't manage to get the history lessons done, but potentially this is the sort of planning that we can develop. Really beautiful stories that can connect us to those communities who are walking this journey to discover, and can allow us to actually find a way where we don't have to live at the expense of each other. And that really, really, really is possible. And it's being fought for throughout the majority world. And when we start on that journey, we walk on that journey and decide to walk on that journey together, then we accept that we are a global majority. And there is I mean, to your question, Lucy, to round it off, there is no power, be it the US government, the British government, the I don't know, the permanent members of the the UN Secretary Council. There's no power that can touch that. As for whether or not, I think, are we going to carry on going around suing governments? It's I think it's probably very important that this work continues and people are doing this work, but we always emphasize that it has to be people led, and there has to be the people to do it. And it's only in our communities that we're going to find that power. And eventually, when the courts show themselves to be completely redundant, and we've started to define collaboratively, internationally, what our rules are, we won't need to be going to the courts at all, trekking into London. Who does that anyway, you know?
Great, thanks. That's a really good, very detailed answer. Sorry, I sort of missed a little bit of what you were saying because my child came and interrupted me, but I know that you've put in an appeal, haven't you, quite recently. Do you know what the next stages of that are, and what sort of time frame that's looking likely to be?
So we always get miffed with timeframes, and we never seem to find out as expected. So that appeal has gone to the High Courts, and yeah, we will wait to hear. We don't know the time frame, but probably in the next. I mean, they clearly are quite busy and under capacity right now, but in the next month or so. So now really also is the time for us to push on visibly, engaging people with the fact that this is happening. But more importantly, starting to present our alternative. So recently, within the Global Majority Versus campaign, we launched local youth tribunals as a project, an initiative to develop the local knowledge enough that in our communities we have our own institutions of law and justice. And so the first one has been launched in the Niger Delta, and that was an opportunity for young people to come together and talk about what are our issues that we face in the Niger Delta. And not only do we know, are we seeing that these are violations of our rights, but we also see that the UK government has a role to play, and starting to be clear that what is the difference between our justice and their notion of justice. And so we're really trying to push ahead to see how, and that could be a local campaigning work that we could push ahead to do.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Have you got any sort of areas where that you can name where that's happening at the moment that we could sort of investigate a bit more about sort of ourselves outside of this?
Yeah, I can what I can do is I can touch it down on I can link you to the website.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And what we're seeing is that it's a process of it's a very, very slow process of being like, why have we firstly been denied knowledge of our rights completely across the board? Why is it that we can't name what they are? And why is it that when we know that there's injustice, we can call it out, but the legal language for it is just not quite there. And so it's really about starting from that space to learn and to take the power to call them out and speak these things. And then on our social media, the project, if you stay tuned, the project is due to start rolling out our videos, and there's been people sending in videos about rights issues.
Okay, great. No, that's really good. Did anybody else have any questions at this stage? I'm where
I've got the questions. I think.
Yes.
Just wondering, you talked a lot about stuff that's happened in the past, and it's really interesting to hear you talking about stuff that's happening right now. You mentioned Boris Johnson and Priti Patel. Thinking about sort of lithium deposits and stuff like that in West Africa, have you got any insight for us into how things might go in the future with the drive to extract very large quantities of minerals out of the ground in West Africa for EVs and things like that. Just wondered if you've got any thoughts about that, because it must be a concern to you.
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, and I'm glad it's actually that attention has been reached here. Yeah, no, this is the heart of the problem, and the reason why we started with the historic example and talking about history is about the fact that what history is showing us is that nothing's changed. This Paul Mooney always used to say, nothing's changed but the weather, which is spot on. He was saying that decades ago, right? Things are getting worse, and it's going to get a lot worse for us if we don't focus our attention there. And that's exactly the point. This move to greenwashing, to a just transition, all of this language is meaningless because it has to come from somewhere, and it has to come from the continued expansion, like extractivism and destruction of our communities and our lands in the global south. And so what we have to do, if we actually think it can be, because it can be stopped, not in the courts, clearly not in the courts, not by the government, but if we start paying our attention and really reaching out our hands to those communities who should know and are yet to realize that there is a force here supporting them to take their lands back, to take our lands back. And so it's a serious fear because it's the current reality throughout the majority world. But if we as the global majority and the global Britain from below here actually turned our attention to saying, no, what's happening there must be a violation. And therefore, if it's a violation of their rights, it's a violation of our rights. And we bring that to bear upon the situation. And that's what if that's what our parties were talking about, if that's what our politicians were talking about, and we were forcing them to talk about, and we were engaging in the progressive forces there, then yes, actually, all of this could be prevented. And it does sound like a big ask. It does sound like but all it takes is for us maybe at another time to sit down and talk about plans between how we can actually develop those relationships and start producing meaningful solidarity to connect with those people. And that's the thing. I mean, there's lithium in this country, but the first places that they're going to go to are there. And so the Akufo-Addo example is in particular one that I hope we can tie into, because this is nothing but a neocolonial puppet stooge of Britain. And they're particularly focused on Ghana because where we come from, our notions of there's still such a desire for a continent that is free from this terrorism, that's free from this violence, that if they can manage to subdue it through a pawn like him and loot the resources to terrible ends, which is still kicking off and displacing, millions and thousands of people, then they can try and actually get their tentacles deeply into our continent and our lands. And that's what's going to sustain, all the rest of the trajectory we're on. But we can stop it now. And we can stop it now just by raising our voices, one, and sending them in and promoting that and saying, we are a united force against what's happening in these areas, and getting our elected officials to speak up about this truth. Because everyone there's conversations about a just transition or a Green New Deal, but what Green New Deal is there when that land is ours and we're still not getting the very basic right to be green on our own lands ourselves? And that's the challenge. And that is the real challenge that we put to the Green Party. And I know that's the work that you guys do, but I'm saying that's the real meaning of this partnership and this conversation, because the talk is not going to cut it. The dialogue, the community relationships really is. And if for instance, as a plan, we could sit down and talk again. I'm starting to see maybe that's possible, that we facilitate this conversation between global Britain from below and its genuinely progressive forces here, to the people in this room that recognize the violence and where we are, with those who, need that support, I'll put it in perspective. One of our campaign members, we've been gathering these witness testimonies to support our campaign push to say, look, there is a whole group of people who see that the UK is in violation of our rights. Now, I'll name him, Brother Elon Kobina, who is one of the command members of our Pan-African Youth Support Action Command, a fearless campaigner for human rights in Ghana, trying to support this case, raising awareness of the issues in Ghana and how they're relevant to us here, tragically was killed last year, just before, actually, about a month before the court case. And he was my age. And the reason why that happens and that is the norm is because talking about a Green New Deal and a just transition is far easier than looking into the real reality of what Global Britain is doing, of where that lithium does come from, and the humans who live there, who are fueling this lie and fueling this destruction. And there is a huge challenge that completely moves us forward into a new vision when progressive forces and the real Green parties hold hands together and we put an end to this foolishness and we adapt being realistic. Life is going to change and it's going to change drastically from what we're used to, but we should welcome that because we should be welcoming justice. And we should be so excited that our young, like my generation might get a chance at a new vision. But it's going to be tough. But thank you for your question. I mean, I think it's a serious concern and one that I think requires a lot more attention and some clear planning, but we can coordinate efforts on most certainly.
Great, thanks. I was just listening to you talk, I sort of can't help in the back of my mind thinking about all these various measures they're putting in place with the new sort of police crime bill and sort of banning the rights to protest and all of that side of things. It feels like it's kind of moving us away from listening to, I guess, the people in Britain rather than, yeah, it feels like they're kind of making it even harder to get our voices heard, really, with these measures in place. I mean, I don't know sort of if any of the work of Plan B is working on any kind of workarounds the policing bill and I mean, I know it's kind of outside of your remit, but obviously it's got a big factor in people's ability to voice themselves.
Yeah, I can't speak on that in terms of what Plan B's work, but I can talk about how they're connected most certainly. I think it's another piece of evidence that needs to bear upon the fact that we have a government that is in violation of all of our human rights in whatever sense. And the fact that we have in this impending and worsening climate and ecological crisis compounds all of the violations that we are already experiencing a millionfold. And that's who we as the global majority, that's the truth that we can bring still to bear upon the courts, so that while they think they're, shutting down rights to speak, they realize they're not at all doing that. And I think it's when they realize that they can't achieve that all of this stuff goes away. But at the same time, from the campaign perspective, within PASAC, this is something that we need to have been talking about for Suing. Because now that it's been nakedly invisible what this government is about, all they have done is identified the historic Britain that many communities around the world have been trying to identify and raise alerts about for centuries. And so let's focus ourselves on you said about them trying to stop our voices being heard, but the question is, whose voices are being heard? Is it the same old us kind of saying this, reaching in and talking about our rights, or is what we're failing to see there that we're just talking about the rights that we've won on the backs of the majority of the world? And so actually, if we can steer our voices, the voices to be heard, to the ones who are just like us are saying the same thing, but can be supported to shout a lot louder, then we can call the whole system's bluff off today. I mean, it's obviously not that simple, but it's saying, why are they, I mean, what are they truly afraid of? They're afraid that this is going to spill far beyond, you know, their little project, but their little project is sustained entirely on the complete silence of the rest of the world. Striking Indian farmers took a huge win and victory in defense of their human rights against this establishment and its accomplices worldwide. It did not break a single news article. And so that's the sort of thing where, you know, again, it's about whose voices are being heard and whose voices are being silenced. Because if that bill passes, should it pass, then again, maybe what it at least might achieve is that it takes us closer to the realization that we are no different to all the people whose voices are silent. And this victory, again, is not going to be won just on the streets here, but it's going to be won hand in hand there. And it's a difficult thing for us to work around, but it's like, you know, many of our communities are so eager for that dialogue.
Great, thank you. Did anyone else want to sort of ask any questions or comment or throw anything in? Sorry, Lucy.
Hi, it's me again. Again, thank you so much. It's just so insightful, everything that you're saying, and how you're saying it is so moving. I'm really curious about perspective, whether that's yours or whether that's the movement's, about, do you see it as it's so unfair that young people are having to be burdened or take on the responsibility to galvanize and mobilize against these very large, very powerful institutions? Or is it being seen as a great opportunity to carve out a future in which everyone is treated equally in the way they should be and reparations are made? Has anything like that been discussed in the movement?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think it's one that gets it's kind of stumped me actually. That kind of, it just, I suppose it's kind of a thing of needing context, in a sense that we, or at least I myself in this case, we can only bring this case with the thinking of, you know, like our communities. And so we haven't been able to bring this as individuals at all. And so when we think about like, what is the actual experience of so many of us, we have to, resolve ourselves with the opportunities that are presented to us, because there really is so much possible. And if we call off the system's bluff, then that winning potential is more clear than it has been for a very long time. The connection of the world to each other and our forces and progressive forces moving forward was, you know, last seen as that necessity back in the 60s and 70s, when that really global outcry for decolonization was putting the world on blast. And we're finally returning to that place again, when we're seeing it as a necessity to connect ourselves to each other. And so as young people, you know, the despair comes when we miss that opportunity. But that opportunity is kind of, it's if we reach out and we have those conversations and kind of see, you know, how do the most of the young people, so the majority of the world's people, I think like the median age is something like 35 or under 40 anyway. So the majority of the world's population really is young people. And so do young people, the question that we have to ask ourselves and find out, and we should work to find out, and what the I Am Witness platform and video is trying to expose is to say, do young people around the world say, you know, are they saying it's unfair that this is so rubbish and, you know, there is no justice for us? I mean, yes, of course they are. We all recognize that there is a complete injustice, but that's been the norm for ages. And so it's not a new issue to hold ourselves to. For those who have just woken up to that, then yes, potentially. But if we dive deep into that archive of all so many people, then that aloneness kind of goes. But the realest excitement in that then is actually all of the people who have learned how to fight through that. And the humanity that we can restore, the connection that we're trying to regain, is seeing that right now in Ghana. There's a movement called Fix the Country. Now, the Fix the Country movement are full of young people rallying to fix the issues in Ghana, and that is the spirit of that movement is one that should wake us all up to the real possibilities and the beauty of fighting, because the humanity that is being displayed in the world is there. That's what it looks like. And that excitement, that positivity, that hope for a fight is everything. And we've been taught, because we've been, you know, miseducated out of that fight, out of that spirit, and it's been taken and ripped from us. We can't see that, you know, these are the people where we'll restore our humanity, where we can restore that confidence and that energy. If it's not Fix the Country, right now there's, you know, massive mobilization. You know, in India, they're actually still mobilizing and still organizing and still pushing ahead. In Mexico, in Puebla, a community group came together to pile on and shut down water extraction that was taking out all of their water wells. You know, these are real wins and real excitement. And I think as young people, like, that's where we need to find our energy and our hope for, because, you know, that's the energy, that's the excitement. And I think injustice, the only thing, you know, more unjust than injustice is settling for it, I guess.
Great, thank you. That sounds like a really interesting movement. I've not come across that, but yeah, that sounds really inspiring. I just spotted there's a comment in the chat that says, I would have thought Britain was in the past. Looking forward, there's a new colonial power which stocks all our supermarket shelves. How are we going to deal with them? Their message is repression. I don't know if that was just a sort of somebody musing, or if it was sort of just very open to the discussion. Yeah, but I'm guessing that's probably China, possibly.
So the opportunity in the window, even in the legal action, is still right here. Right? We still have to make that realization that the stocking of our supermarket shelves is a violation of our rights, and we need to own that truth. And, you know, just something, I mean, we have this, I mean, it's about to roll out as a social media campaign, but that's part of what you can see on the globalmajority.earth website, is part of what that you could contribute. And it's so meaningful for someone here to stand up and say that I recognize that this is a violation of my right. And actually the UK government's failure to recognize this is even worse, and the courts are even worse. And for that to just be shared as a powerful testimony of truth-telling, when truth-telling becomes a revolutionary act again, and we're not shy about doing it, that is what we can do to defeat this new colonial power. And when we do that, and we actually make that and we also make that connection to the fact that, you know, in the Fix the Country movement, who are being made to be invisible by the forces here, and we recognize that truth, and we speak on that truth and the justice that we want for Fix the Country to be able to fix the country, for their constitution to recognize their rights, and the UK having a role actually in playing in that, then that's how we deal with them. And we also realize that that new colonial force isn't a new, it's the same old, that's the old colonial force at play. And so we can develop and use all these new methods for our forms of solidarity and resistance. But we need the same old masses of people connected as we have in the past to affect this change. And we can rebirth and reintroduce that story.
Great, thank you. Did anyone else want to throw up any comments or questions? It's really powerful stuff. Sorry. Yes, more. Go for it.
Kobina, that's really fantastic. It's very sobering what you're talking about. I feel in a way terrible that, because it's also obvious, and I feel terrible in some senses that, you know, we rattle on about Green Party issues, and this is something so much more fundamental. It's appalling, really. How much are you talking to other organisations? Are you talking to Extinction Rebellion, and have you spoken to the leaders of the Green Party?
Yes, we love critical dialogue. It's important, and that's the way that we work together and learn from each other. We don't know everything. We're young people who want to learn from older generations and the wisdom of our parents. We've got a lot to learn from each other. There's a phrase that my elder spoke to me about earlier, which is each one teach many. And that's an important part of our relationship with Extinction Rebellion. We're in the Affinity Youth Network. And so are connected with so that was a new formation that we brought together to connect Global Majority Versus campaign with groups like XR Youth Solidarity and Radical Restart, about how we can collaborate on pushing and working to harmonize our strategies. So if people are in those spaces, then do look out for any messaging or information that comes our way. And you know, Extinction Rebellion is really moving in that right direction in terms of understanding that, you know, we all get things wrong, but in understanding where the rebellion is, which is throughout the majority world, and making more of those realizations about how we build those connections with people. As for elected officials, we started off with a relationship with discussing with Caroline Lucas, and it'd be great to reestablish that energy behind the campaign. In many ways, because of that, we want to be very clear on what our position is, and we think there is work that can be done, less so than our leaders. This is the chat that I think we can do the most with. I mean, just so all of this becomes a bit concrete, I think it would be really amazing if, as a suggestion, so we don't leave just talking again, we see if we can meet together and discuss local plans and a local initiative where we can actually think about what is the global connection between East Hertford and other places. How can we put this into practice through very ordinary means of change making, because that's where we need to recover, you know, those things that we can do, that change making that we can do here. And that's a proposal that I'd like to present from GMVS PASAC, because it's the groundswell. And if we want the leaders of the party to understand us, then we have to, you know, find who we are and put that on the table, and they will come. But if anyone has a direct link to Caroline Lucas, of course, you can give a shout out.
Only via Twitter. So it's in like commenting on her comments. So it's a good question. Because I was wondering too where it sort of fits in with the Extinction Rebellion and kind of other similar sort of campaign groups. So no, thanks for that. That's sort of on my mind as well. Okay, does anyone else want to add any comments or throw anything out? Yeah, Julie, go for it.
So what one thing could we as a local Green Party do to become more local, like from tomorrow? Boycott all the supermarkets, or what could we do? Because we do things on a very local level. We hardly ever talk about local issues.
I mean, so rather than, I mean, there seems to be loads of things. I think one thing we always say is one of our campaign slogans is decolonizing our minds, decolonizing our lives, our lands, sorry. And so what does that mean? What can be done in the global north which is in solidarity and harmony with the global south is, yeah, to try and cut that, you know, the way in which we're forced to have this exploitative relationship. And so we really about seeing how we can promote what we're trying to call local community adaptation plans, where we actually harmonize those adaptation processes. And so there's all these things that we can be doing about, you know, regreening our areas, community gardening, all of these things that are so powerful that actually are about recovering our indigeneity, and that we can do also just actually walking hand in hand with other groups and other forces. And so again, I think if we could, in terms of actually thinking about like actually working together on a global plan, this is something that I could take back into the campaign and to talk to, you know, talk to other communities and peoples through networks, and perhaps we could convene a meeting and put those things together and practically on the table see how we can start harmonizing twinning actions, twinning events, and doing things. We've got some exciting plans going throughout this year, and especially from young people, there's like a real push for us to promote you know, big victories. In Chile, for instance, they elected, through the parliamentary system, they elected a president who has vowed to end copper mining and might be instituting a constitution, like you said earlier, Simon, that might end lithium mining, or at least put a hard decrease on it. Now, that is a huge, huge thing. But we know the forces that be are, like, especially from the history in Chile, are going to come after that real fast. And so, for instance, one of the things we've promoted is we're working on planning and trying to see how many partners we can get kind of globally, as this sort of local thing is, how many local parties could we have where we're critically assessing and showing our support for the victories of young people organizing in Chile. And what would that mean to the Chilean people to know actually there are a lot of people around the world that are supporting, that want them to win this fight. And it's going to get tougher. And we know the CIA, we know, you know, Western influences in particular, and others, you know, have vested interest in those lands. So how is it that we can start to build that dialogue where they know and we know that we are a global majority? These are the sort of things that we can try and outdoor, and we've just put together the plan for the year. It's not gone out yet, but if we maybe set up a meeting, I could, I mean, Sarah's got my contacts. That's something that we could actually set up a meeting and try and create a plan about, because we don't have time to talk, actually, only, to be honest.
Great, thank you. Yeah, sorry, I'm aware that we've taken up more of your time than I originally suggested that it would take. There's just so many really, I think, sort of like Maura said, I mean, it's stuff that's kind of obvious, but it's thinking about it in a different way, and just thinking about it some more. It's just so easy, I guess, to hold certain values, but in terms of day-to-day living, it not necessarily thinking about it in that way when just, I guess, making purchasing decisions, or, you know, so just all of that side of things. And yeah, so it's a lot of food for thought. Yeah, and thanks, Julia. That's a really good question about what we can do locally as well, which seems like a next logical step, really, just what we can actually do tomorrow or over the coming few weeks.
Yeah. Also, I just saw, sorry, Simon, can I just quickly, I saw a message in the chat and I realized they might have gone, but for the sake of it being, so that it stays on the recording, the question was about, maybe you could give more, the question more thought, and it's about China and the role of other powers in the climate issue. And yeah, this is something we do need an answers to and things to be concrete about, right? China, which has a population of more than 1 billion people, or no, or close to, I'm actually not sure. Pollution per capita is still less than a country like the US. I mean, these facts are already out there, but because this question comes up, we should really use that question to point out what that question's about, which is about global Britain, again, and a geopolitical game which forces countries which actually are putting a lot more investment and billions into greening and transitioning than other countries. Bearing in mind on top of that, that China is the country that manufactures all of our consumption and demand. So the response to that question, again, is to think locally, act globally. And if we want to decrease China's impetus on providing the world's rubbish, to be honest, which is what it is, we need to stop demanding it. And we need to become sustainable ourselves and decrease that pressure on that supply chain. And that would also, that's the same energy that would free up all of our farmers, for instance, that get slave wages for lifestyles here if we looked closer to home. And that question, roused me up, and I think it's important that it gets called out for what it is, because it's really problematic and it's completely ahistorical. Not to say everything's perfect in China. That's not the point of the point.
But well said. Wow.
I've heard that not everything's perfect in China. Sorry,
Simon.
Sorry.
No, Simon, go for it. Sorry.
Okay. Kobina, I was just flicking back through some WhatsApp exchanges that we had in the East Arts Green Party over the weekend, and I mentioned someone called Dr. Elizabeth Suing. I don't know if you've ever come across her. I only just have. But she talks about a concept which I'm pretty sure she says that she has come up with. It's called multi-solving. And we're looking at very complex ideas here, aren't we? As we're listening to what you've got to say. And you know, we're looking at very complex systems and trying to change very complex systems across the globe. And her idea of multi-solving might sort of help you. I'm not sure, but it goes something like this. If because it goes back to one of the most recent questions, I think more asked, you know, what can we do locally that might help you? And if we can reduce our fossil fuel emissions in East Hertfordshire, for instance, then there could be other benefits, not just in helping climate change, but there could be health benefits and other benefits for other countries across the world because of the reduction in the use of fossil fuels. For a start, it might start to compromise some of the influence of some of these vast multinationals that wield so much power. But the whole multi-solving idea, I could see if you look into it, might just fit with some of the things that you're saying. It's a new idea to me, which is possibly why I'm being a little bit vague on that. But can you see how that might work for you?
No, exactly. No, I really can, and I'll really look into it. That's super helpful. Thank you.
I'll put something on. You know, I'll put her name down for you. But she's written a few papers on this as well. I'll type her name in now for you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think, especially if we can, I guess not everyone wants to change out of concern for climate, but if there's other compelling reasons to make changes, I guess, you know, whatever's going to lead to that change to an extent is a benefit, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the language around climate doesn't mean anything to anyone. Yeah. That's the issue. And that's something we've been learning about in campaigning, right? Doing this with the support of our communities. The language we're using about it's not like despair about the climate. It's no, this is literally about, we want our land back, and ordinary people want it. I mean, if ordinary people had their land back, you know, everything's good. We'll work it out ourselves. We can have our food. We can, you know, the jobs we don't like, all of that kind of goes away. And the human rights violations are all of these things that have been put together to separate us from that, and then live in terrible situations on top of that. So the language aspect is really important, and I see that's where multi-solving comes in. What we always then stress is the fact that if people could see and learn from those voices who are pushing ahead and who are showing us, and that's the force that we saw as ours, then we have a sea change. And because that we come up with that again, I think it's a real planning and thinking, and starting where we already have some of those relationships, and that's something I said I'll take back. If people are keen here, I don't know how we can facilitate that. Maybe Sarah will know.
Yeah, we'll have to exchange, have further exchanges outside of this. So I'm just aware of time, and that I think we're notice I think a few people have had to get going, although there's been quite a few comments about saying it's been really interesting and really powerful. So yeah, and it sounds like there's enthusiasm for sort of taking it further, really going forwards. So thank you very much. I don't know if anyone wanted to sort of add any final comments at this stage, or no? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I think I'm going to have to go and listen back over the recording to sort of get it all in my mind again. But it's been really, really fascinating, and it's just really great to hear more about the work that you've been doing and all the work around the case with the government, and just thinking about it all in terms of the global majority, which I guess, you kind of sort of think about it in that way, but that's, I guess, not really the dominant conversation that I've experienced when it comes to climate change. So it's really good just to highlight that, really. So no, thank you. And as I say, all the comments in the chat have been very appreciative as well. So no, that's great. Thank you.
No, and honestly, thank you all. And I feel like this is the start of something. So I'm super keen and super grateful for the time. But also, yeah, that that it feels like, it's always reassuring to some of the points that have been raised have even made me think about, where the emphasis we place, and like the lithium in Ghana thing, like these are, how do we center these things in meaningful ways? And if we can develop a plan around that, these are, we've had to be very clear that the strategy in the campaign, we've strayed away from, okay, we're just gonna go out and march and all of these sort of things, because we've had to be kind of true to, okay, where are the priorities, and with the capacity we have, what are the connections that can be made, and how do we build that consciousness? And it's a long game, but I think, yeah, there's some meaningful roots here that will kind of be a wider support from the campaign than I think we even realized just yet, and we'll kind of discover more and more. And this is just the start of getting to know each other. So.
Yeah. Good.
Great, lovely, thank you. I'm just going to stop the recording, so I'm afraid you're not allowed to say anything else interesting, because